Hello and welcome to ShePack. Today I'm joined by Heidi Solomon-Orlick, founder and CEO of Girls Who Sell. In today's episode, we're discussing paving the path for female sales leaders. Heidi, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast. Welcome. What I love about what I've learned about you is we both share a huge passion for amplifying voices and sharing wisdom of women and trailblazers in our industry. So I was so excited when we met. It was just like natural energy when I met you, my friend.
It was. You were like my immediate sister, so it was awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
and I
awesome.
appreciate everything you do to really amplify the voices of women, right? I really do believe we're better together, and when we support each other and lift each other up, that's when magic happens.
Yeah, I also feel like hearing everybody's stories, there's so much motivation and empowerment to just know that you're not alone in those stories. So love that. Same thing. I feel the same way about you, my friend. So fun fact about you, Heidi, is that you were part of the original 26 who did the march in Washington. What was that like?
Oh, um, it was an incredible experience. So yeah, I was one of the original 26 members of the National Organizing Committee for the March on Washington. It was absolutely an incredible experience. One, bringing diverse women together from backgrounds who were complete strangers to just align on a mission that clearly, with 5 million people marching around the world, we're in the Guinness Book of World Records, actually.
Oh, look at that.
Went from a moment to a movement, right? And just it was absolutely magical. I remember when we went to the Watergate Hotel, which is kind of epic, actually. And we took over the entire bottom of the Watergate Hotel to create what we called the Peace Room. And we were doing the last minute planning, and there was a lot of security, to be honest, because we were getting death threats and all kinds of things. And we were really beginning to try to anticipate how large we thought the march was going to be. And I actually have a picture of the original route that we were supposed to take. But standing on that stage and seeing a ocean of over 1 million people just in Washington, D.C. alone was the most phenomenal experience I've ever had. It was like, oh my gosh, right? It was incredible. So we actually on the fly had to change the march because, and the route of the march. But you know what? It was bringing people together for a common purpose. It's really incredible what you can accomplish.
Yeah, that's so amazing. I remember when you were sharing that with me, I was like, oh, that is the coolest thing. I've never been part of a march. And clearly since then, there's been so many marches since then after. And so really exciting. And I think it's a good transition also into learning more about Girls Who Sell. And that is something that, like I had mentioned, that you are the CEO, the founder. What inspired you to create this organization?
So I have spent over 3 decades in professional sales. And I will tell you that choosing a career in business to business tech sales was not anywhere close to being in my top, list of what I wanted to be when I grew up, right? And that's like so many women today and forever, right? That they fall into sales. It's not necessarily an intentional career choice. And after 10 years in the ad agency business, I transitioned into what is called business process outsourcing sales. So working with companies that outsource their customer service and their tech support and their back office and all of that. So it's a high value, complex sale that over the years has even gotten more complex because of the integration of technology. And it was highly male dominated then and continues to be male dominated even over 30 years later. And I just was really focused on, one, how I could differentiate myself. Because when I was first starting out in sales, I was told that to be successful in sales, that I really had to act and be like a man. And that was just inauthentic to me. In fact, there's books even today that talk about that. Right. And so I decided that my true competitive differentiator was leveraging my innate skills as a woman, particularly in a highly male dominated profession. And so I was always all about mentoring and sponsoring young women and training women and diversity, equity, and inclusion before it actually ever became a thing, something formal that companies committed to. And so fast forward, 30 years. And, I went through a real transition in my life in late 2019. Both my parents passed away, which was a really difficult time for me, but caused me to take a step back and really begin to think about legacy, which we've talked about, and what kind of impact that I wanted to make in the world, and how could I leave the world a little bit better place than how I found it. And I wanted to do something that would leverage my expertise in professional sales and combine it with my passion of working with young women. Yeah. And so what happened is I came across in late 2020 a Harvard Business Review article that was talking about how women are the future of business to business sales. And I was like, what? Because I had been in sales for so long. And so started to really do my research and peel back the onion and realize the level of gender inequity and the lack of diversity in sales, not only just for women, but if you look at any other kind of diversity statistic or overlay, it's, like women of color and in the LGBTQ plus community, it's just dismal, right? The numbers are low single digits. And so Girls Who Sell was born. And I decided that was my life's mission. And I wanted to try to do my part to try to solve for the issue. And let me tell you, it is a big issue. So one person is not going to be able to solve the problem. But I think collectively, as we all come together and really focus on trying to democratize professional sales, I think you're going to see a change.
No, I love that. The one piece you had said, and I was laughing inside because I heard the same thing when I started out in sales. I remember someone telling me, "Are you ready to be a meat-eating, hungry salesperson?" And I thought,
"Rah, booyah!"
No, I'm not. But like you said, it's like you were so well ahead of, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and just making sure that it doesn't always have to be so aggressive. There's, you have this book and you talk about how powerful emotional intelligence is and how effective it can also be in sales. And so having part of that voice of females coming into that workforce, specifically in sales, has been, it sounds like, part of that legacy that you wanted to start out with.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And I think, I don't like putting people in boxes generally. I mean, but for this conversation, I will a bit, in that, women do have the innate skill set to be successful in sales. And, sales is based on trust and building relationships and solving problems and being good listeners and some of the skills and innate traits that are inherent to women. And that aggressive behavior, in general, I think is not well received. In fact, it's probably why sales has gotten such a bad reputation to begin with. And so, I think we need to, one, focus on, debunking some of the myths about what sales is and what sales isn't. And that's one of them that we just got to put to rest, because that strategy of being aggressive and it just isn't going to work, and buyers are not responding to it. And I think that's probably why women are in general, overall better and more successful at sales than their male counterparts.
Mm-hmm. Now tell me, so when you built out the Girls Who Sell, what did that consist of? Was that, enablement courses, or what were some of the things that you built to help empower more females as a sales professional?
So it was born in the pandemic. So so everything I had to think about, all right, how do I build a virtual platform, which was definitely foreign to me, how do I take what's in my head and just things that I have done in my career, innately, or things that I've learned, and put it into a virtual platform. But the first place that I wanted to start is that there's a lot of organizations that are doing really, really great work in working with women who are already in sales. I mean, if you look at Girls Club, or if you look at Women Sales Pros, or you look at Women in Sales, or Women in Revenue, or Sisters in Sales, right? They're doing a fabulous job and playing a very important role in upscaling women and getting them into leadership roles and career pathing them. I decided that I wanted to get a little bit younger, because what I was hearing as I was talking to companies is that they did have a real commitment to diversifying their sales team. They just didn't know how to go about doing it, one. And two, there was this pipeline issue, right? Like, we don't know, like we advertise and but women don't apply, and we're not really sure why. And by the way, we could do a whole show on that. So we won't even go down that rabbit hole today in terms of why women are not applying for jobs. And it has a lot to do with the language that's being used in these recruiting ads. But I decided that really where I wanted to focus is building the next generation of sales leaders, and really building legacy, not for me, but for the profession in general. And so I believe, and it started actually with Women's March, although I always enjoyed working with young women. I worked on a team that ran the Young Ambassadors group, and it was really incredible because we had young men and women from all over the world that were submitting applications to be a part of our Young Ambassadors. And these kids from 8 years old to 18 years old were absolutely brilliant. And it really opened my eyes to one, the true impact that individuals in this age group can have, right? And two, that they're our future, right? I'm aging out, right? So it's my job to be able to pass on my wisdom and my knowledge. I consider myself a bit of a wisdom warrior onto the next generation, because that is what's going to leave the long-term legacy for the profession. And frankly, and then I'll get off my soapbox, but frankly, we started with, high school and college age women, but my inclination is to go younger. So I'm looking at, building programming for middle school students around entrepreneurship and sales, and then even going younger, creating a kids club and for girls, 5 to 9, because I think that if we are going to change the mindset and get women to actually choose sales as a profession because they want to achieve financial and economic independence, then it's got to start younger.
Yeah, well, I will tell you. So I had done a post, I don't know, I think it was a couple weeks back now, where you had given me these certificates and let my girls be part of the girls club. And I can't tell you how excited they were. Now, I did have one for my 2-year-old, and she was just, she held up the side really proud, not really realizing. But I think, just like you said, we have to start that early. And I think as they start to develop in those important years, I know for my girls, they were like, yeah, Mom, this is awesome. What do we do now? And it's like, it's going to continue to evolve. I also think it helps us as parents to start instilling that mindset in our children. So I think it's so exciting. I also love what you said, wisdom warriors, my favorite. My favorite.
I'm a wisdom warrior.
That could be a whole nother session.
Wear it proud. Wear it proud. No, and I think even if your girls don't, end up in professional sales, I truly believe that sales is a life skill. And I've said
totally.
this in many, many interviews. And the fact that at 2 years old and 4 or 5 years old, and however old your girls are, the fact that you're beginning to share these stories and teach them some of the foundational skills of sales at such an early age, right? It's like, okay, listen, I'm hoping that if we start teaching sales skills and negotiation skills and earlier on, we won't have a pay gap because we're going to teach girls how to negotiate.
That's right.
We're going to build confidence. We're going to overcome imposter syndrome, younger. And so, I think it's absolutely critical to teach sales and entrepreneurship as early as possible.
Yeah, completely agree. Now, as you built out Girls Who Sell, you also created the book Heels to Deals, which, for those of you guys who have not had a chance to read it, it is a collection of stories about the journey of female sales professionals. But as you say in the book, it's more than just stories. It's really about facing truth, creating personal triumph, and conquering adversity. So what led you to pulling these stories together?
I love that question. And a lot of it stemmed from the fact that, here I am as a, over 60 white woman, trying to tout sales as a profession and, having the mission to build diversity in sales. And I felt like, God, did I really earn the right to have those conversations, right? And here I was in front of, young women from, diverse backgrounds and underserved and underrepresented communities. And of course, I was filled with a life of privilege, and I understand that representation matters. And so as I was thinking about how I position sales as a career option for them, I was really thinking, one, I shouldn't be the face of the organization, right? I could be the wisdom warrior, and of course, they appreciate me for my experience and my success and all of that. And I have a lot to share, but I thought, gosh, women can't be what they can't see, and so how do I create something so that they could actually see and hear from women in maybe similar background or similar situations that I don't have. I don't come from that from those types of backgrounds. And so that was really the foundation of the book is I want to bring together a diverse group of women from all over the world that are in all different stages of their sales careers with all different backgrounds, and for them to share their journeys. And that is the best way to potentially inspire, future generations of saleswomen, because any person can pick up that book and find themselves, themselves in a story or more than one story. And, we talk about, when I first was putting the book together, I went to Bridget McGowan, who's a publisher. She owned and is founder of BMC Docs Press. It's now Press 49. And I went to her and I kind of pitched the idea and said, what do you think about this? There's nothing like this out here, out in the world that really focuses on amplifying the voices of diverse women in sales. There wasn't a book like that. And she was like, oh, I think it's awesome. And so I was really intentional about finding the women to be in the book, right? I did a lot of research on LinkedIn and I wanted to align with women that shared my values, my personal values, the values and mission of the company. of Girls Who Sell. And at first I was a little worried. I was like, God, is everybody going to have the same story, right? And we're all sharing the same advice or the same thing. And then, but I'll tell you, the stories are so phenomenal, right? Of women overcoming adversity and, getting pregnant in high school and having to find a way to support their families, or, women who had grown up in generational poverty and, maybe were first generation college students and were really passionate about achieving financial independence and not having to rely on others to reach their goals and their dreams, and just on and on, like, maybe trying to leave abusive relationships. And so story after story after story of just women who overcame insurmountable odds. And somehow, even though we're all from all different backgrounds and all different ages, and somehow we all ended up in sales, and it changed each one of our lives.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, and it's great to hear the different perspectives and diverse backgrounds of everyone. Now, in the book, you also highlight 4 pivotal moments in the book that made you the leader that you are today. And so if we go into those 4 pivotal moments, the first one, tell us about your background and your thoughts on the nurture versus nature debate.
So first of all, just to kind of frame the pivotal moments, I really believe in the power of pivotal moments in people's lives. That there are things that happen maybe to us, or they could be good things, positive things. They can be based in trauma. There's a lot of things, but during those moments, during those times, we're at a crossroads. Right? We become at a crossroads in our lives, and there could be big major moments, and then there could be micro moments along the way. And I believe that every human during those pivotal moments makes decisions, and those decisions that are made during those times are what end up governing how we show up in the world, and how we react to certain situations. And so, I'm sure each one of us could go through and begin to identify, if you think about, your life, of beginning to identify certain moments that happened that you're like, yeah, well, that was the moment that I decided that I was going to do X, Y, Z. And I'm still that way, 40 years later. That was kind of the foundation, and why I thought it was really important to share 4 pivotal moments. And there are many more that shape who I am as a human being. But the first one that I highlight is, I've always been fascinated by the nature versus nurture conversation, particularly when it related to sales, because it's like, oh, she's a natural born sales person. I'm like, is she really? Is she right? Like, is that a thing? And actually, research shows that environment, does play almost more of a larger part than genetics when it comes to certain skill sets. I believe. And I'm not a scientist or a geneticist or anything like this. So this is just Heidi's personal beliefs. But I believe that we're all born with a genetic makeup, right? A genetic predisposition. And based on that genetic predisposition, your environment can shape and enable, those things to become more prevalent, or maybe not, right? Like maybe you were born with a predisposition to be super creative, and yet your environment put you in athletics and maybe, and that was my situation, right? Like I never really thought of myself as being creative. Where it came from is that I was adopted when I was 5 days old, and it was a private adoption through a rabbi and an attorney. My birth mother was 21 years old. She was not married. And like so many other women back in the 1950s, she wanted to keep me, but that was not going to be a thing, right? Not for her family. So she was put in an unwed mother's home in Cleveland, Ohio. And, she gave birth to me, and at 5 days old, it was the, exchange literally like in the park, she brought the baby, and she had named me Jill Planchak. And she was from, I found out later, a small town, blue collar town in Pennsylvania. And when at 5 days old, they exchanged not only me, but the paperwork. And I became Heidi Solomon with the signing of a single piece of paper. And it completely changed the course of my entire life. And now, obviously, that's a pivotal moment that I wasn't part of influencing, but it's something that has, influenced my entire life. And I was given, every opportunity. I knew I was wanted. I knew I was loved. I was brought up in a family that was highly competitive. And so I was put into competitive sports, and I was competitive by nature, but so I was an alternate on the U.S. equestrian team. I rode horses. I was on the, college tennis team. I skied, and that was just part of life of what, of the way that I was raised. Basically, it was because my adoptive mother was not particularly athletic. She was like, I want a girl who's going to be super athletic. So that was her pivotal moment and decision she made, which influenced me. But anyway, long story short, I always felt like there was sort of this missing link to my life. And I didn't have any genetic history. And so my middle son was born hearing impaired. And I was always really fascinated by, or just really wanted to see if I could get some genetic information to see if that was just an anomaly or whether there was hearing impairment in our family. And through a series of incredibly strange karmic events, I ended up meeting my birth mom, and then actually meeting both of my birth parents. And that was where it was like the yin and yang, like the two sides of a coin came together for me, because I realized that, that was the missing link. What I always think about is I wonder if I would have become the right person. Like if Jill Planchak, was raised, if you think of like, I don't know, this is getting a little woo woo, but if you think of parallel universes, right? Would if Jill Planchak had gone this direction and Heidi Solomon went this direction and they met sometime in the future, would they be the same person? I don't know. I think I had a certain genetic predisposition, but I think my environment played a huge part on who I ultimately became as a human being. I mean, do you see that with your girls?
It's interesting because, I have 3 girls. They have the same parents, yet they're also very different. And there's areas where, I do think nature comes in. And in some cases, one of my daughters has my personality. She's artistic. And then I have my other who's just very competitive, which is also like myself, but it's also like my husband in a lot of ways. And there's a little bit of perfectionism. But there are areas that, when I look at them, they're not like, in some cases, my husband and I. And so there's areas where I want to nurture that piece because I'm still exploring. I want them to have their own identity. And as much as nature comes in, there is that piece of they have their own identity. And so how do I continue to nurture that and let them figure out who they are as a person versus me, having my influence?
Yeah, I think that's so important, right? It's just to kind of give the children exposure to different things, and then see what bubbles to the top, right? And then, once you see, what is bubbling to the top,
That's right.
then you can begin to really nurture those, those sides of their personalities. I agree. I have 3 boys, and they're completely different. I mean, when we've had our first boy, Dalen, we were like, oh, we got this parenting thing down, right? Like we're really good at this. I mean, he's so easy. He's got, and then we had our second, and we thought, oh, and anything we learned or did, that worked for the first
opposite
was
rules.
It was completely opposite. And then the same thing happened for the third, right? It was like, we don't know what the hell we're doing, right? And they don't send you home with a learner's manual, right? Of, how to raise children. And so you have to adapt. But yeah, so I think this, nature versus nurture thing is super interesting. I feel very blessed that, I was raised in the environment that I was raised in, and that I was given the opportunities that I was given. There's, I carry a part of my birth parents with me every single day.
Yeah, no, I think that's
and
awesome.
She was my birth mom was a professional. She was an artist. And so I'd never thought of myself as artistic until I met her. And that's when I really started to discover like my passion for writing. And I like to write. I had gone to school for journalism, but really like for interior design, I can't draw for the life of me, right? Like stick figures is good. And she did these amazing art pieces. But I love interior design, and I love gardening, and that's sort of my canvas. And so after I met her, that was a side of me that I really began to nurture and develop.
Yeah. Now, did you guys stay in touch and you started to learn these things? Because you do talk about how in the book, how when you met your biological parents, you realized that there was sides to your personality that just hadn't been fully developed or explored. So was that like meeting with her on a consistent basis, learning more about her, and then as part of that, discovering things that you actually were interested in?
Yeah, it was, I mean, I wouldn't say that we became instant best friends, right? Like I found out that my half brother had passed away about in a car accident about 6 weeks before I had met my birth mom. And the way that I had found her was completely bizarre. We have to say it for another episode because it's just like crazy karmic. And so when I contacted her, I said, hi, I'm Heidi Solomon. Now she didn't know my name had been changed. And, I've been searching for my birth mom, and my search has led to you. And I'm just wondering if you could help me. I mean, and I didn't just call her and say, hey, mom, how are you doing? Long time. So she was like, well, tell me what you know. And I said, well, it was a private adoption. My mom was in a unwed mother's home. She's like the Florence Crittenden home. And I said, yeah, and private adoption, blah, blah, blah. And that's when I found out because she said, I named you Jill. And I was like, wow. And she said, Rich sent you. And that was my half brother. She said, because he knew my heart was broken. Aww. And when one door closes, another, a window opens. And so he sent you into my life. And so that was the beginning of this relationship. I started talking to her, and I didn't even know she was Pennsylvania, and I was living in Pennsylvania. So that was really strange. So when I had moved to Pennsylvania, I called my mom, and Dad said, wow, it's really weird. I feel like I should have been raised here. And it wasn't until I met my birth mom that I knew that she was actually from Sharon, Pennsylvania, but was sent to an unwed mother's home in Cleveland, which was also really weird. But anyway, yeah, so it was the beginning of this relationship, and I flew up to Sharon. I met her, and it was like a big deal, right? Like, we made the front page of the newspaper. It was a slow
Oh, wow.
news day in Sharon, Pennsylvania, but it was really cool, and that's when I started to get to know her and get to know the family, and yeah, and until she passed away in 2019. So both her and my mom were both named Marlene, and they both passed away within 6 months of each other, which is really, really odd as well. But in 2019, she passed first. And so I had a relationship with her until then. And so it was good. But actually, when I met my birth dad, I realized that I was probably, even though I discovered this whole creative side of myself that I really began to nurture, I'm probably more like him. He was a businessman. He owned a trucking company. So he was an entrepreneur, and I only met him once because he said, "I'll meet you once, but I can't have you part of my life." And I said, "That's okay. I respect that." And, but getting to know a little bit more about him when I met him, I realized that personality wise, I probably did pick up, a lot of genetic predisposition from him. And then the rest was just environment.
Yeah, it's such an interesting piece of it. Now, we also have that second pivotal moment that happened in your life. And you talk about, as a young child, you describe yourself as boundless. You never wanted to color within the lines. However, at the same time, you were also by nature a people pleaser and a rule follower, which caused you to fear pushing boundaries and succumb to what you call this linear universe where everything is black and white. So what was that moment that inspired you to break those boundaries?
I grew up in a generation where, young girls were to be seen and not heard. And, I say this in the book, sugar and spice and everything nice. And it was all about being pretty and demure. And that just wasn't me by nature, right? Like I was always questioning. I always asked a lot of questions. I had a high level of curiosity. I never accepted the status quo. I was just always asking, well, why? But why, right? Like, the universe, it just didn't make sense, sometimes to me. And so I wanted answers. And I think and even still today, in the world of standardized tests, that children are put in boxes, right? And I really have an issue with that, And so it was in seventh grade, and I think they still do it today, where your IQ is measured by an IQ test that you take, and it's just standardized test. And I was never a good test taker, ever. It always made me nervous. And the way my brain worked, that any question that you could ask, and I hated multiple choice tests, because I would fail epically because I could make any answer work. Maybe that's why I'm so good at sales, but I could be like, yeah, well, I could make sense of that answer or that answer, and that could be, and we could. Anyway, I did not do well on the IQ test. In fact, my IQ scores came in really, really low. And I remember going into the principal with my mom, and they were, reading the results of the test, and it was just shocking. Like my whole world had shattered, because basically I was being told that I was just stupid. And that I was really never going to amount to anything in my life. And, what my mom was just like, but that doesn't make sense. The scores don't make sense. There's got to be something wrong with the test, right? She was just like, it's not my daughter.
Yeah.
And it was just, and she was just saying, because she does so well in school, right? And she, she's an achiever. She's an overachiever. And so if she scored so low on this IQ test, how could you be so, successful? Now, I was only in 7th grade, but still, it was like this defining moment in my life. And the teacher said, well, she just works harder than everybody else. And so that's going to be her thing, right? If she puts her mind to it and she decides that she's going to do something, then she's going to make it work. And it might take her a little bit longer, but she will be successful in her life. And my mom and I left the meeting, and my mom was like, don't worry about that test, right? Like, and I in 7th grade made the decision that I was not going to be defined or measured by the status quo, because the status quo is based on achieving average results, and being average was not something that I strived for. And so that's pretty big decision at 7th grade, but that was it. I just, and yeah, it did take me longer. And yeah, I did probably work harder than most people to maybe get the same result, but I got the result, and I learned how to work hard, and that, not everybody gets a ribbon, right? Like, not everybody wins. You got to work hard. You got to have purpose. And so I think that's part of what's, wrong, not wrong, that's a terrible word, but with this generation, it's like everybody gets a ribbon. No, everybody doesn't get a ribbon. Last place, and that's what I learned is, and being in competitive sports, that was the other thing in riding horses. I realized that was also very subjective. And so I decided to focus on things that I could control, like the things that were in my control. And then I defaulted to process. And I'm still, even as a salesperson, kind of a very process oriented person, because that makes sense to me. That makes sense to me. But I do believe that the world's a better place if you can not only find a way to live in the gray, but to, I don't know, to look at the world in color. I mean, rainbows are incomplete without all of the colors.
Yeah, what I loved when I read that piece of it is it's not always, and it doesn't have to be, black and white. What was interesting is, growing up, I am a horrible test taker. So everything you were saying, it
you can
resonates
relate
with me. I could totally relate, because I would overthink the multiple choice, and I could make a situation out of every single one. And I always felt like, oh, okay, well, if I'm not a good test taker, then I'm going to fail. And that wasn't the case. And so just bringing more awareness that there's different colors, and you don't have to subject yourself to things that are and can be subjective, but focus on the process, which is, again, something that you had mentioned, and I love it.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, third pivotal moment that you had brought up, let's discuss how you entered into the field of professional sales and the influence that your father had made on you.
Yeah, so I mentioned that my father was, one of the best sales people I know. He was also a very successful entrepreneur. He owned a textured coating company, and he was also a master storyteller. And he really showed me early on the power of the true power of storytelling. So it was just something that became part of my DNA, because he was telling me stories at a very young age. And, I wanted to run this business. And, in high school, I had asked him, I was like, well, I think that I could be really successful in running your business and in growing your business. And I had all of these ideas of, what I would do, and, kind of this rudimentary business plan of how I was going to exponentially grow his business. And he shut me down, boom, and said, first of all, no way that you could be successful in the textured coating business because it's for men. And he didn't want me to go into sales, right? Sales was a man's job. And that was it. And so he said, absolutely not. Right. I really think that you should go a different career path. And I got into journalism and speech communications and advertising and all of that. And then, fell into sales many years later. But that pissed me off. Like, what do you mean that I can't run your business or that I can't be successful at sales? And so it lit a fire under me. And I was going to prove him wrong. And I did. So, eventually he did end up having my younger brother run the business, and some trusted male advisors, come in and run the business, and they ran the business to the ground. They ended up, he got taken for a lot of money from this guy. They ended up bankrupting the business, and my father, before he passed away, said it was he doesn't have many regrets in his life, but one of his biggest regrets is that he didn't give me that opportunity to come in and run the business. So I went and sold for other people, and it worked out okay. But I'm no, I'd say in the book, I'm no psychologist, but probably not a surprise that I ended up doing the career that I ended up doing.
Yeah, I love that. It's one of those things, and I always, my husband gets so irritated, but I'm like, is that a challenge? Did you just challenge me?
Right.
And then it's like what you said. It's like, okay, you get that fire in your belly. What steps did you? Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, what steps did you take? So when he said that to you, I'm sure it was, devastating, and then you get that kind of fire in your belly. But what steps did you take to prove that statement wrong and then break through those limiting beliefs?
I don't know that there was anything intentional. I think, again, when you just talk about pivotal moments and decisions, it just was like in my brain, I just made the decision that I was going to prove him wrong, and that I was, and not necessarily, I don't know that I said, like, at that moment, I didn't say, all right, well, I'm going to go into sales and I'm going to go be, a maverick in the texture coating business. I just made the decision that I would be successful in a man's world, and that I would figure it out no matter what. And that I was not going to allow anyone to tell me that I couldn't be successful doing something that I wanted to do, as long as I put the amount of effort and passion into doing it. So that was the decision. And so that was sort of the fire that fueled me throughout my entire career. And probably today, even today, still fuels me. Now there's the flip side of that coin of, you also are thinking, ooh, am I not capable? Am I not good enough? Like you're, that imposter syndrome. And that's something that I, overcome every single day. Still thinking, am I not enough? Do I not have the skills? Do I, because that also, that's, the yin yang or the other side of that message of, you can't do it, you know? And I'm like, well, one, I'll prove you wrong. But then it's like the other little voice on your shoulder, like, I don't know, maybe maybe you'll fail.
Yeah. Yeah. But challenge accepted, which became the louder voice.
Challenge accepted.
Like speaking of learning, your last pivotal moment, while your dad had these strong beliefs about women in sales, you mentioned this earlier, and he taught you how to be a great storyteller and a problem solver. So what key storytelling techniques and lessons did you learn from him?
So when I was a little girl, as early as I could remember, my dad was on the road a lot. He traveled a lot for his job. So I really coveted the moments and time when he was home. And ever since I was a little girl, he would tuck me in at night and he would tell me stories about three elephants that were Mumbo, Jumbo, and Dumbo. And it was a family of elephants, and Dumbo was the baby, and she was mischievous, and she was always getting herself into trouble. And of course, Dumbo was me, right? And he would utilize, he would create these stories on the fly. It was absolutely incredible to me, but weaving in like things that were happening in our lives or places where we went or things. But the way that he framed the stories as he was telling it, as Dumbo was going on these, adventures, and she was finding herself in these situations where she was in trouble and she had to figure out how to solve and overcome the challenge that she found herself into. He would ask a lot of questions to me, like, Dumbo has found herself in a real pickle. What do you think she could do, to get out of this situation? Or what do you think she could have done to have avoided the situation to begin with? And so it was just these conversations. And in the end of these stories, she always solved the problem, and the family was all happy, and then, going on to the next adventure. But when I think about it, when I really look at it, not only was he teaching me the power of storytelling, but he was teaching me foundational sales skills of, overcoming objections and finding solutions to problems, and building relationships and dealing with conflict, because there was family conflict, right? Because of course, her parents were upset that she found herself in these situations. And so those stories really became an important part of my life. And I think that's how I learned sales, was through those stories. And he, even when my kids were born, and I told you this just before we jumped on the call, he used to tell my boys those same stories when they were babies. Mm-hmm. So they would fly out, we'd fly out, and he would tuck them in at night. And my son Dalen, my oldest, actually just in honor of my father, just wrote a children's book called The Adventures of Mumbo, Jumbo, and Dumbo. And it's so, talking about generational legacy, the stories that he told me, have carried out throughout the years. And I think that they are also foundational for my kids as well, in the way that they run their lives.
Yeah, I love it. I was telling you this before we recorded as well, as when I was reading that piece, I started integrating that with my girls so that very early they could hear these stories, but even most importantly, problem solving, because that's a skill set you're always going to need in your life, whether you're in sales or you're not. So many great things, obviously, that came from, the relationship with your dad and who you are today. And, my last closing question for you, my friend, is, in a world of possibilities, what mark do you dream of leaving as a trailblazer for future generations of empowered women?
Color outside of the lines, and always ask why. Never accept things at face value, and understand that life is a journey, and that the decisions that you make along the way will impact and influence, how you show up. But showing up matters. So always show up.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Thank you so much, Heidi, for being on the podcast, sharing your story. And for those of you who are interested in sales, And even if you're not, that's such a great skill set to have because all of us are sales people. Check out Girls Who Sell and make sure to purchase Heels to Deals, which I will make sure to also have in our show notes. So as we wrap up today's episode, let's remember that in supporting one another, we amplify our strengths and break down barriers. So go out there, champion for your dreams, empower your peers, and continue to shape a future where every woman realizes her true potential. Until next time, see ya.